My talk, unfortunately, I've got a microphone, is about solving the cost of living crisis for the UK. But of course, this crisis is in many countries, and some countries have taken policies to offset it and do something about it. And indeed, we heard from Francisco in the first session the policies that Mexico's followed. And I think, I talked to Rogelio about this, and I saw how important and how revolutionary that approach was in solving what is a terrible problem for many, many people. The fact that they can hardly afford to, in this country, to heat their homes, and they can hardly afford to buy basic foods. Basic foodstuffs have shot up in price to quite a lot of people's upset and horror. And at the same time, the amount of food going to food banks has gone down because people have needed the food for themselves. So that's where we are. So I'm going to talk about understanding the system that we're talking about, the causes of the crisis, the effects of the crisis, and the solutions of the crisis. And the solutions I want to talk about are those which combine net zero, and by net zero I mean a transition to a net zero greenhouse gas emission economy, world economy. It has to be world, everyone has to do it, everyone, every institution. And combining that with equity, effectiveness, and efficiency, the 3 E's, which I believe we should assess every policy and project. So the economic system, this is a view of the economic system as I think it operates. Uncertainty, money endogenous, created by the system, effective demand drives all the other things. It's demand that drives, it's not supply. The economy is structured through institutions. This is down in college, an institution. The trust is an institution. Institutions is a very broad term for, as you say, rules, norms, customs, laws, households, industries, nation states. These are institutions. They work within boundaries, hence the space and space-time economics, and these boundaries change through time, and these institutions evolve through time. This is all essential in understanding the system. It's a dynamic system, and we hardly know it at all. We only see the outcome. The great financial crisis, 2008, another one which is far bigger, which is about to happen, which is unfolding as I speak. Economic behavior is social, institutional, macro, and cannot be derived from micro behavior. It's such a nonsense to think a state's behavior can be derived from a household's behavior. It's just wrong. It's just wrong. Path dependency. Path dependency, that's time. Time moves one way forwards. I'll say that again, because path dependency is central to, for example, the dramatic fall in the cost of renewables, solar, wind. We've seen the transformation of the energy system because of path dependency. And if you've not got that in your economics, and it's not in your classic economics, you're done for. How can you possibly understand the evolution of the world economy without path dependency? And then finally, the capitalist economy is an open system. It draws on natural resources, obviously, and it tends towards inequalities in income and wealth, as well as it tends towards the destruction of the natural environment, and we shall all go extinct in the end, perhaps 400 years, if we continue, following the greed that comes out of unrestrained following of a neoliberal ideology. All right, so I thought I'd compare Keynes' general theory with New Keynesian. A New Keynesian is, for example, Paul Krugman is a New Keynesian. Stiglitz is a New Keynesian. With space-time, post-Keynesianism. And in common we have the national income accounts, social accounting, input-output, effective demand in the short term, liquidity preference, consumption functions, multipliers. But the rest are different. Ethics is different. Keynes had animal spirits. New Keynesian is Benthamite, basically, Jeremy Bentham, utilitarianism. Spade's time, post-Keynesian, is observed behavior. We humans are satisficing altruistic punishers in evolving social groups. Yes? Yes. Oh, we punish all right. We punish socially and we punish privately. Uncertainty is pervasive. Time and equilibrium. Equilibrium is nonsense. I will not use that word unless to criticize. Equilibrium is in the heads of those who use the word. It's not, it doesn't exist. We're not in equilibrium here. Downing College is not in equilibrium. The economy is not in equilibrium. It's an idea in economists' heads, and they persist in putting their theories around that concept, and they've been done it. Even Keynes did it. Very disappointing. Oh, I like to say that sort of thing. Finally, analysis. Honestly, general theory in New Keynes, it's not scientific. It is not scientific. It's rhetorical, diagrammatic. The output gap, what on earth is that? Could you measure it? Tell me about, if there are any neoclassicals here, neoclassical economists, tell me how you measure the short run. What is the short run? How long is it? 2 seconds? 10 minutes? 3 months? A year? Now, if you were scientific, you'd actually have a definition of the short run. They don't. It moves from model to model. I don't have a definition of short run because the short run is whatever you want it to be. The short run in terms of climate change is the next 100 years, right? Oh, press the wrong button. That's that one. So the causes of the crisis. The first one, interestingly, is the reduced role and the reducing role of emerging economies. Emerging economies are China, the Far East, economies which have had very low wages in relation to their export, their countries they're exporting to. Right, so this is all a bit tricky, but it's quite clear that the joining of China to the World Trade Organization and the continuing low cost of Chinese exports or imports into the United States, for example, had a major effect on keeping the rate of inflation very low until the great financial crisis. And indeed, many economists thought that, the problem of inflation had been solved, amazingly. The problem of the cycle had been solved even. And the problem of, we were going to emerge into nirvana. What we actually emerged into was the great financial crisis and the bankers having to save the banks. The bankers saved the banks. That's what happened. If you look at in the detail of it, the crisis was engineered and managed by the bankers. Lehman Brothers went bust and was then saved in a week. And during that week, all sorts of crimes were committed, financial crimes. But we won't talk about that. That's a whole lecture in itself. In fact, it's not just one lecture, it's a lifetime's of research. So that's the first one. The second one, obviously, COVID, Russian invasion, supply chains breaking, and then the deliberate cutting of supplies of energy and foodstuffs. That was, a wartime. Everyone knows it was wartime. I mean, pipes were blown up in the Baltic Sea. Grain silos were blown up deliberately to cause famine and starvation, deliberately. Does anyone support Russia here in its invasion of Ukraine out of interest? Then we have to say it is true that inflation can be systemic, and that inflation breeds inflation. When you have lots of prices going up, food prices, then people say, oh, I better put my price up or my wage up. It's all expectations after all, isn't it? Inflation's all about expectations. It's not, and the past, because the past guide our expectations. And then finally, some of inflation is obviously administered. Some prices are determined by world markets, oil obviously, metal, agriculture. Others are fixed. Look at iPhones. They're fixed. It's a world product. I bought an iPhone in November. It's still the same price now as it was then. And it's fixed across countries because Apple doesn't like cross-country trading. So what happened when the iPhone supply chain broke? They started using algorithms to ration. Now, algorithmic rationing is something I don't think we actually want to see, because you've got to think of the Stasi and you've got to think of what's going on in China if robots are going to tell us how much we can have, how many phones we can own, which is the way things are going at the moment. So, of course, the UK had a few extra things. Monetary and fiscal policy since 2010 has been a complete disaster. I mean, talk about mismanagement. And it's been going on since the 2010 crisis, the 2010 crisis, I mean, that 2010 crisis was, in fact, the end of the great financial crisis. And Brexit, what's Brexit done? It's undermined confidence, it's weakened trade, and it's weakened the pound. Political division has led to very poor policy making and major errors such as the Truss Kwasi-Kwarteng episode, which is an episode of shame in British economic policy making. I mean, when the Prime Minister gave a speech about economic growth, and it was quite clear she had no idea what she was talking about. It was shocking. And then finally, the unexpected and rapid rise in UK interest rates. That has shocked the system, and in fact has led to more inflation because of hoarding and all the rest of it, and increased volatility. You know, interest rates going up, they're still going up, they're still going up. I mean, is this the right policy? I don't think so. But, you know, I thought I would give you a bit of technology here, i.e. a chart which shows from The Economist, and it's data stream. I mean, you could argue by this, that, and the next thing. The main point here is the Phillips curve, the beloved Phillips curve of new Keynesian. I don't think neoclassicals have ever heard of the Phillips curve, but certainly new Keynesians have. I'm afraid that's lost its power. It's lost its power, and you're not going to be able to. If you look at 2010 to 2019, you're not going to get much relationship between inflation and unemployment, and I think you will find that in Mexico, that any relationship is just gone. It's just indeterminate, the relationship, because there isn't one. I mean, there could be one. It could be one induced by behavior of producers, but from that data set there isn't one, and there certainly isn't one in terms of financial crisis and economic turmoil. So that's now coming on to the cause of the crisis. A list of rather unhappy things: division, poverty, mortality, morbidity, inequality, loss in well-being, loss in welfare, loss in self-respect. Loss in self-respect. Think of that. You can't measure that, can you? Some people just say, I've given up. And what do they do when they've given up? They die, typically. So, how to solve it? First of all, we as a country, or we as the Western world, we should recognize that we are at war. The effects that we're seeing are wartime effects. They're unprecedented losses of GDP, unprecedented increases in inflation in a very short time, which is typically what happens during a war. And moreover, this war is not just in Ukraine. The war is a war of ideas. It's a war of Russia, a whole country, warring against the West, warring against Western values, warring against Western democracy, undermining it with stooges. I won't mention names, but there are many of them. So, if we're at war, we need wartime responses, which would be rapid, flexible, regulated, local, and politically acceptable solutions. That's what I'm putting forward. That's what you'd find in wartime. Everyone working together. That's what we saw in COVID, didn't we? In the response. Communities coming together, helping each other. Worldwide this is going on, except perhaps in China, which has a different approach to these things. I won't talk about China because China is very interesting in its response to COVID. And only in China could that response have taken place. I'll just say 2 words about that response. When the political situation in China became untenable at the end of COVID, the Chinese government changed policies in 2 weeks. Complete 180 degrees turn, complete from one to another. That was amazing. I don't think any other country could have done that. And only with a communist centrally planned state could you do that. Just change like that. And it seems to have worked. I think it has worked, but we'll see. So, of course, those that wartime economy requires new institutions, because I don't think the army wants to get involved. I mean, ask the army, ask the Navy to police the Channel, and the Navy says, sorry, Home Minister, Home Secretary, sorry. We took an oath to save lives. We will not allow lives to be lost in the Channel. So, new institutions, for example, and I'm not pretending that I can solve. I think it requires a complete change and shift in approach. It requires new institutions, for example, local assemblies dispersing new money via such projects. Now, we know all about local assemblies. You can see them on Newsnight, right? Politicians are doing it all the time. They're trying to find out what people want and then meet those desires. But then maybe the government should actually leading. It shouldn't just be following what people want. Think about that. A government of leaders rather than a government of followers of populism or populist. People just, want to do good. Well, we all want to do good, hopefully. So, such projects funded nationally, monitored regionally, learning from others, and by trial and error. That's how we move forward. The human race moves forward by trial and error all the time. Successful companies make mistakes. Most young companies die. Death by trial and error. They do. Of course they do. It's called the Valley of Death. And typically with a little small company, some small companies, of course, grow into very big ones. Apple and, Google and Facebook. Think of Facebook at its start. Because most small companies come from ideas, but if the idea isn't tested, and then lessons learned, and then moves different ways, finding out which is successful, which fails, the company fails. So the successful companies are successful because they do trial and error. So, now coming to the key areas, which is what we learn from the Mexican experiment. It's not an experiment, you're actually doing it. Plus learning from what you're doing by, the changing things at the border, which is very interesting. But I mean, any country can do that. We could change things at our ports. And in a way we are doing, because we're having these special port areas. Although I'm not sure I've designed them the way they have been. So we need a new basic needs price index. So that would be basic needs and the prices of basic needs, and put it into an index. There are indexes which are similar to that. It's fairly easy for the ONS to do that. Then interested parties then are to apply basic needs. Interested parties applying basic needs agree on coordinated and centralized supply, yielding economies of scale. That reads as a sentence. So, interested parties, who would they be? Well, the big food manufacturers, right? Who are supplying to the big supermarkets already basic needs in terms of the essentials, or of all supermarkets you go there, you see their shelves of what are considered basic needs, potatoes and veg and other things. They agree on coordinated and centralized supply, yielding economies of scale. So every country, more or less, in the West, and I expect there are exceptions, the food industry tends to be dominated by very large companies. Think of the supply of sugar in the United Kingdom. 2 companies, one does the importing and the other does it from, basically sugar turnips. So this is an industrial policy which, of course, went out with, I don't know, a very long time ago. We used to have industrial policies. In the 1960s and 70s we had industrial policies. They were overthrown in favour of the market. But in times of warfare, in a time of war, the armaments industry is essentially nationalised. You produce this and you produce that. I suspect that's what's going on with the armament industry in the United Kingdom at the moment. They're told what to do, and they make a lot of money out of it. So that's where you get the economies of scale. And then finally, the wage rate increases are negotiated in relation to the basic needs price index. So they might be a little bit more than the price index. But the idea, of course, is to generate a dynamic in which the economies of scale become dynamic. The price index starts to fall, and you have a dynamic which reduces the overall rate of inflation, but at the same time improves the inequity of people at the lower, who are poor because they don't have the resources that they should have, not being able to afford the food. And this, of course, allows it to happen, because the prices will then fall of the basic goods. And the wage rates, or the minimum wage rate would go up with, I mean, I say this, but of course such things can be and should be modelled. So you can't, this is just an idea as opposed to actually solving it. I'm not solving it, I'm saying pointing a way forward for any country. Any country can do this. I mean, basic needs is basic to humans. We have basic needs. Now, you can say, does having a television a basic need? Does having a mobile phone have a basic need? Probably does these days. Having electricity supply, a basic need? Yes, probably. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Could you just put up the previous slide, just in case that's something that we want to come back to? Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, let me start with Jeff and then Graham.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'd quite like to see that slide again when you compared Keynesian to neo-Keynesian and stuff.
Okay.
I thought that was very, very interesting. But on that, yeah, that's very, very interesting. Can I have a copy?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
I mean, you can have a copy. I don't think a copy on a virtual copy, or
I don't mind.
Virtual
I've
copy.
got a printer. I mean, I accept what you say, but I mean, in limited ways, surely there is an equilibrium, and in limited ways there is a short term. So all these terms are relative, aren't they? I mean, you either have a relative equilibrium. So if you've had employment running at 95% or something or other for 10 years, you'd think there's an element of stability there.
Yes.
But I wonder whether you're confusing the terms static and dynamic
Yes.
with equilibrium and non-equilibrium.
Yes, fair enough. So I'll give you a glib answer. If you go to Mill Road, there's a cemetery. There you'll find equilibrium. I'll give you a more nuanced answer.
Okay, carry on. Carry on.
Sorry. The more nuanced answer about equilibrium. Sorry.
I beg your pardon, I said this is the necrophilia.
Sorry.
All right. Enough with the jokes. Carry on, Terry.
Enough of the jokes, yes. A more nuanced answer, I'll have to stand up, is stability. I will use the word stable. Yeah. I'm quite happy with the word stable because the word stable also has opposites. Unstable, okay, or volatile, not volatile. But equilibrium, is it in equilibrium or is it non-equilibrium? Because equilibrium is an idea, whereas stable is more also an idea, but it's more something you could say, you know, this table is stable. I didn't mean for that alliteration, but there you are. Or you're stable as a person because you're not frail or you're not bouncing around in a gym.
And equilibrium it suggests there are forces tending towards, and which stability doesn't. I mean, you may observe stability and wonder why it's persisted, but that's a different thing, it seems to me. Graham.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that, Terry. As a old-style Cambridge Keynesian like yourself, you won't be surprised that I agreed almost entirely with your economic analysis, but I'd like to hear a bit more about what you meant by post-banking crisis monetary policy. You were very critical, but you didn't say what it should have been. Perhaps you could say a little more.
Chancellor Osborne and his policies, that's who I'm criticising.
Well, that's fiscal, not he wasn't banking. Did you have a criticism of the monetary policy as well?
So the whole thing.
Fiscal austerity.
Yeah. What about the monetary policy?
The monetary policy, which was a combination of quantitative easing and zero interest rates and various trial and error interventions in the market. I mean, a lot of experimentation went on after 2010 to see what might work, and none of it did. I mean, did it work? No, it did not. We had moved from an average rate of growth, we're talking about productivity, but we could also talk about output, of about 1.7%. I mean, I think you had a 2%, and it went down to, what was it, 1 point? Now it's expected to be 0.7, or maybe even 0.5. That is economic, I mean, you can say other countries also had a reduction, but I mean, compared to what, I mean, I've been looking at economic growth for a very long time. It used to be, we used to talk about it going up to 3% per annum. I mean, not over a decade. 3% a year, not over 10 years. We're talking about it over 7 years, are we, or 10 years? Shocking. And how has this come about? Complete lack of confidence in the banking system, which was engineered by the fact that bankrupt banks were saved. And so what happens after you have that kind of global effect, where it's obvious that the bankers went off with larger bonuses after the crisis? Everyone knows what went on. People virtually know, in the only country that actually prosecuted bankers and sent them to prison, as far as I know, was Iceland, which actually did have trials on, you know, the banking crimes. There were crimes. And some of the crimes were concealed by changes in the law. That's not right. It's not right that the bankers should change the law so that they can't go bankrupt. That's not right. That's the system going completely wrong. Now, this is not new, as Richard will know, can testify. We had a conference in November 2008 on the banking crisis where we produced solutions which still hold water today because I've looked at them again. So does that answer your question? Probably not.
Somewhat.
Somewhat.
I suppose your point, Graham, was that the Bank of England cut interest rates to nothing, and what else might they have done? Is that that was it? Yeah.
Well,
What do
the
you
quantitative easing was what they did, isn't it, on a big scale?
Do you think they shouldn't have done that?
Oh, no,
Or-
I think they should have done.
Oh, okay.
But I think
okay.
the fact that they tried to do it all through money and finance was the mistake.
Oh, okay.
Because what happened to house prices?
Yeah.
Now, think about housing in this country, which is exceptional. Housing in this country is another world altogether. First of all, of course, obviously, most of the houses are second or third or fifth or nth hand, right? They're old, right? They're old. Now, they may be improved. So we're talking about a market, a financial market for old things that are not produced, right? So it could be for paintings. It could be for anything that's old. It could be for gold coins. But the way our housing market has developed over the years, and it's peculiarly British, and it's to do with inheritance, and the fact that people's wealth, real wealth, is in their housing, right? In other countries it might be in their crypto. Heaven forfend. Would you like your wealth to be in crypto? Probably not. So that's why I make such a distinction between real assets and financial assets, because financial assets can become worthless, just like that, like crypto, like the 14 billion that man Bankman-Fried pinched, stole from the investors in his crypto scheme. And what did he do? Lost most of it, he claims, went off to the Bahamas, then was arrested, now he's in jail. Bankman-Fried is his name.
Okay.
I'm still not clear, Terry, what you thought the Bank of England should actually be doing during
Look, it's as if you're asking me to go there and be in the Bank of England and what it should have done. But as the Irishman would say, I would never start from there, would I, if I wanted to get to a destination?
Yeah, if I understood your point, it was that the entire scope of policy, including fiscal policy, was inappropriate, and they were relying on monetary policy alone.
I mean, they had a wrong analysis
something.
of the past to begin with. I mean, it wasn't Labour that caused the crisis. It was the banking system. It was a systemic effect. The system. We're in a very complex system which we don't understand, which is leading to, shall I say it, extinction of humanity. That's what it's doing, and we haven't stopped it.
Okay, let's run out of time for any more questions or comments. Yeah, Anne.
Thank you. Very interesting slide there, and I want to study that more. But the question I want to ask is about unpacking your concept of basic needs and the solution that you propose to how to meet those basic needs. I mean, you've just pointed out that housing is a stock, a historic stock, and there arises the question of how it should be modernised and distributed. There are other things which are not market goods at all, like nature, clean air, access to green space, etc. There are other things which are stocks of infrastructure, like the power generating structure and the railway lines, which are, if you like, historic public good stocks. And then, you know, the whole question of distribution and how your idea of wage bargaining being related to a basic needs index doesn't deal with the question of benefits at all. And I mean, given that a large proportion of the population are not working, I mean, I think at best it's still, you know, about 25%. You know, we need to see how those people will fit into the picture. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Well,
Do you want to respond? Or
yes, no, I'll respond. You're talking about a way of looking at the world which is, I agree with entirely. I mean, I'm with you, and which conventional mainstream economics does not deal with properly at all. And the way I approach that is to think of things that we consider, you and I would consider good, and things that you and I would consider bad. And also to think of things that you and I would consider marketed, what is marketed and what is not. And the marketed ones are, of course, to do with the economy. The non-marketed ones, you know, the view of the moon last night, that's not marketed. It was free for anyone to look up. That's not in the market. And yet, we value it. Of course we do. You know, when I took a photograph of that and put it on Twitter, people liked it. They liked to look at that and think of the full moon, because the full moon has its effects, as we all know. Well, we ought to. Well, some of us grow lots of hairs on the full moon, and then we go out and roar in the night. Not me, of course. But I mean, you get the idea. But also you can divide up everything, not just into good and bad, into marketed and non-marketed, but you can also divide it into what's collective, what we all enjoy collectively, like the rail system. Well, maybe we don't enjoy it, but we put up with it to get from A to B, or the road system, or the water system. And you think about those collective resources, which should be good, but in the case of the water quality on our shores, it's not good. We think about that, and we think, well, maybe a collective decision should be taken collectively to put that right. I think most people want clean water and feel that they have a right to it.
I mean, on the question that you were raising about, you talked about wages being indexed or being negotiated.
Yes.
But people whose incomes are not coming from wages, say welfare recipients, I mean,
well,
presumably you would base that on related to the wage increases or the price index?
I mean, I haven't really thought about how to, this is very broad. You know, my solution has to be very broad. And I didn't emphasize enough the locality issue, because the problem of benefits is a locality issue. You don't have much of a problem of benefits in Cambridge, in Trumpington. There will be pockets of it, but not generally. So West Cambridge tends to be, or Eddington, right? I mean, maybe there are homeless people, in fact there are homeless people at Eddington, but I don't think they come from Eddington. Eddington is a little village which has been built with university help, I believe. It's on the outskirts and which has wind tunnels in it. I mean, it can be very cold and bleak. But have I answered your question?
Well, just that, so you haven't dealt, or you speak.
Sorry. I think what I'm looking for is some idea of what the benefit system in your scenario would look like. Thank you.
The benefit system, each locality should be looking after its vulnerable. Defined as people who are homeless, who want to have, some people are homeless, don't want to live in a home. They're happy what they're doing, or they're not happy, but they can't see a way out. And they won't accept any way out. They're just doing what they're doing, got used to it. But some people want a home, and I think it's up to the localities to seek to provide them with a home. And I'll just take the homeless as an example of people on benefits, because the homeless do get benefits, and they're desperate for benefits, actually. You talk to the homeless, it's when they're next going to get their money from the benefit that they're going to live for the next, whatever the bed for the night or whatever. So I think it should be a local solution, and that the benefit system should be greatly expanded. And you could.
Doesn't that go back to doesn't that rather go back to the days of money on the parish and the workhouse?
Sorry, money of the parish and the workhouse.
Yes.
But why would we do? Why would
the pre-1940s system was very much geared to local application administered by local administrations. but its fault was that, you know, people could be shunted from one area to another.
Yes. Well, let me put on my solution, because you'll see that I have thought of that sort of. Interested parties applying basic needs agree on coordinated and centralised supply, and such projects are funded nationally. So it's a national funding. I'm not saying national, like that National Health Service is nationally funded. So the funding should go nationally. It should. I think the workhouses, the poorhouse, etc. You have to ask how that was charity, wasn't it? I'm not saying the charity. I'm saying this is not charity. Let's be clear. This is not charity. It's not benefits. It's each.
Or a regionally devolved system.
Yes,
yeah.
it's a regional evolved system from the present one. I'm not. This isn't going back. It's going forward.
We're about at time, so unless there's another burning question, thank you very much, Terry, for that provocative talk.